You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanders,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is...
Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm super excited to have one of my all-time favorite authors back on the show with me. Faye Kellerman has a brand new book. It's called The Hunt, and this is this book 27 for Decker and Lazarus?
I'm not quite sure. It's either 26 or 27. It's right around there.
Wow. Well, Amazon says it's 27, so we'll go with their counting and sort out the details later.
That sounds great.
Oh man, Faye, since we chatted last time, the world has gone through a pandemic, and it's been kind of crazy. How have things been on your end?
Very good question. This book was a pandemically written book. So it gave me something to do. We're doing okay, but I'm glad the world is opening up. That is the main thing. We are social animals. We are social beings. We're not meant to be in isolations just with our dog and our cat and our family members. We're meant to venture out and explore new territory. And for a writer, that's especially important because you get so many ideas just by wandering around.
Now, you and your husband both are writers, so I would imagine that the majority of your work life is spent at home. But there's a weird thing that happens when the rest of the world is at home working as well. Did that have any effect on your creativity and your process? Other than we're social creatures and we want to go out and mix and mingle with other folks or have people over and fellowship. But, is there a strange mental thing that happens when, the rest of the world is kind of doing business the way you do?
Not for us in specific. It's good to mention that because writing is kind of a solitary activity. It is it is a solitary activity, unless you do script writing, of course, which is like in groups. Novel writing, you have responsibility for it. It's your baby, good or bad. You take all of the credit. You take all of the blame. So for me specifically, it wasn't that big of a deal. We spend a lot of time, Jonathan and I spend a lot of time in our house. We have a pretty big backyard, and I garden and I do my little things anyway. So when the pandemic started, it was easier, I think, for John and I to isolate than it was for maybe somebody else who's used to commuting and having that office group support. So for us, it was okay. I miss my kids. I miss my grandchildren. No matter who you are or what you do, it affected you in some way, shape, or form. You're not meant to just be in prison, even if it's a beautiful prison, for all that time. So I was really glad I'm really glad now that things are opening up. It just makes you so psychologically healthy.
Yeah. Faye, a question that I've been asking people lately, and we've had a lot of fun with it, is there a piece of writing advice that you received from someone, and either it was so brilliant that it has just stuck with you all these years, or is there a piece of writing advice that was so horrible that it sticks out in your mind?
Not advice specifically. My credo when I write is, write what you love, write what you know, and just do it, because it's the writing process that spurs ideas. It's a very weird feedback. You start typing and then your brain reads back what you typed, and that stimulates you. Writing stimulates writing. That's my one writing advice that might go against other people is don't show your writing to anybody unless it's another writer or an editor or your spouse. One person, because other than that, you're going to get, once you throw your manuscript out there and go, what do you think? You throw it out there for 4 people, you're going to get 4 different advices, and it's going to confuse you. You have to have confidence in your work. So keep your writing private and just do it.
Faye, you wrote your first book, published your first book in 1986, and that's when we first met Decker and Lazarus. You received a doctorate in dentistry. Were you a practicing dentist when you started writing?
No, I had just graduated dental school, and then I started having my kids. After dental school, I wanted to take some time out. And then once the writing bug kind of hit me, it's not that I never wrote before, I just never thought it as a possibility of a career. I thought it was more of a hobby than a career. But then I saw my husband write, and he was using it as a hobby too, kind of, until he got published. He was my greatest inspiration. He was tenacious, he was creative, he had plans. So I had a lot of false starts in between that 6 years of graduating dental school and being published. I guess it was 7 years or 8 years. I started writing this and I wrote that, and it took me a while before I found my vehicle and my voice, and I found them in Peter and Rina. Of course, when you're writing a first book, which was The Ritual Bath, you don't know it's a first book. You have no idea if it's going to get published or not. So you write from the heart, but you're trying to write so that you may appeal to other people, especially an editor. So that's how The Ritual Bath was born. It was something that I knew a lot about, being a traditional Jew myself. I had to learn the ins and outs of police procedural. So I visited a lot of police stations, but that was part of the research and part of the fun.
I'm always fascinated by the moment of inspiration and the birth of an idea, because at one point these characters didn't exist, the ritual bath didn't exist, there was nothing about it, and then something triggered the what if game in your mind, or these characters walked onto the stage, or whatever it was, and then all of a sudden these characters exist, and they're going to carry you 27 books into the future, or whatever that number is, 26, 27. Do you remember, can you reach back to that, where the idea for this world began?
Very good question. As I said, I had a lot of false starts, but I started writing from a point of view, the basic writing credo. You write kind of what you know. So Rina was actually born before Decker was. And I like the mystery genre, crime fiction, because I am mathematical, and it had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and that appealed to me. But I wanted it peopled with fluid characters, not kind of an Agatha Christie who runs the whole book. I wanted more characters that people could relate to. I mean, I have a lot of kids. I've been married a long time, so I kind of transferred that to Rina. So when she got involved in this crime in the ritual bath, I didn't want her solving it. I thought that would not be realistic. So Peter came in there, and then I had Peter and Rina in my head, and I figured, okay, she was a widow. He was going to be a divorcee because it just worked out that way. Their interaction was sexier that way. So you throw in a romance, because who doesn't love a good romance, a good hidden romance? And that's how the ritual bath was born. She was the first one who came into my mind, and the first developed character. Decker actually came a little later.
Looking back over the catalog of these books that you've written, is there an overarching theme? Are there topics that you revisit? And if so, is that intentional, or have you looked back and are able to see a theme developing?
I try to deal in human themes rather than corporate schemes or scandals or a lot of TV programs you see, there's always a corrupt cop or a corrupt person at the top who they're trying to bring down a corporation or bring down an activity or bring down the police department with something. That's not my interest. My interest is human behavior. How does crime happen, and how does it affect the people around them? Obviously, a murder, you have a lot of victims that are still alive, even though the main victim is dead. How did this happen? What perpetrated? It's the everyday person who gets into a situation that allows them to do something very, very heinous. I don't usually do serial killer books. That's not my thing. It's human beings that, through situations, have caused them to do something that they wouldn't ordinarily do. And I like to onion peel it. You peel back the layers and discover what was the reason for this crime and what was the reason for this behavior. That's my thing. That's my thing. It's much more on a human level than on a big scandal level.
Looking back over these characters, what has surprised you the most about the character growth and where they are now compared to where you first met them?
They've gone from like 40 to 70, so obviously there's life experience growth. And they've also been married, and so there's obviously went from two I's to a we. So that has happened. What has surprised me is Peter's intensity in solving a crime is just as obsessive compulsive at 40 as he was at 70. He just has to go out there. He has to find what happened. It bothers him when he doesn't. He relentlessly pursues justice. And Rina has been a little bit less involved, but she is always there. Not only as a sounding board, she often has conversations with him that make him think in a whole different direction because she's so sharp. She's pursued her own life. She's pursued her own interests. And I think because they're both come from previous marriages and they're both very understanding of one another, and they don't, they're not too demanding of each other's attention. They're both people who are content within themselves, and that has formed the basis of a very strong relationship.
Have there been seasons of writing these books where one character comes to the fore and the other takes sort of a back seat? And I guess what I'm asking is, these characters for you have to have become just as real as any real people. I mean, they inhabit so much of your brain space. Do they go through the cycles that people normally go through, where there's ups and downs, there's ebbs and flows, and some days we're better than other days? Did those types of things affect your characters?
Oh, absolutely. And we've had situations where they've had down periods as well as up periods. as far as who's taking center stage, sometimes Rina's very, very involved in the crime. We've had 2 books where Decker's daughter, Cindy Decker, or Cindy Cutiel, she's now married, has taken center stage. We've had other books where I bring back, for instance, The Hunt, the current one, where I bring back other characters. In this case, it was Justinati and Terry McLaughlin. They take center stage in the book The Hunt. So it's always, they have kids, they have grandchildren, they have foster kids. So there's always a wonderful play of which characters I decide to bring back. Which characters speak to me and say, hey, I have a story, listen to me. And I can bring them back, I can bring them forward. It just depends on how they talk to me. And as a married couple, they've had up periods, they've had down periods. And that's what people like about them. They've followed them for 30 some odd years through their life cycles. And it's very relatable because it's relatable to me, so I'm assuming it's relatable to a lot of my fans. And my fans are the greatest, by the way. I love them. They're just so supportive and so wonderful. And I couldn't have done as much as I did without the support and the feedback of them. So thank you. Thank you all of you guys out there.
Absolutely. I don't remember exactly where along the journey I joined in the Faye Kellerman fan club. It's been a number of years. But are you surprised that people hang around for as long as you're churning out books? Not only have these people become real characters to you, but they have to us as well. And I look forward every year when a new book is coming out and I get to go on the next adventure. Not only have you created these characters for yourself, but you've created them for all of us as well.
Oh, thank you so much. That's really fun. I hope so. I mean, it does surprise me that I've lasted as long as I've done, and it's great. It's just absolutely wonderful that people are still interested in these 2 marvelous people. I do really try to make each book as individual as possible. You can't change your characters radically because it just doesn't work that way. They have a kind of a certain personality. They do develop, but you can't suddenly have a whole different epiphany where they're going to go in a different direction. But what you can do is put them in novel situations and see how they react. And that's how I try to keep the series as fresh as possible.
So speaking of that, when it comes that time of year where it's time to start working on a new novel, you have a very well established world, if we can use that term, and that's inhabited by a cast of characters. Of course, we've got Decker and Lazarus, but we've got this cast of characters that surround them, and like you said, sometimes you bring this one in, sometimes you bring that one. But when you start thinking of like plot for what the new book is, do you start thinking in the beginning, okay, what sort of trouble am I going to get them into? What sort of crime is there going to be? Or is there a particular character journey that I want to go on with this book? And what sort of plot devices can I use to move these characters along? How do you start thinking about a new book?
Good question. I always start with kind of what do I want to say in this book before I even start with characters and think, because if you don't have anything to say, why bother?
Right.
It's not just how do I get them into a plot. It's what do I want to say in the book? In this particular book, The Hunt, that's coming out, I wanted to contrast functional relationships versus dysfunctional relationships. That's how I started. How do I get there? Well, then I start thinking of the characters. Okay, Peter and Rina have a really functional marriage. I brought back Chris and Terry because the relationship what is and always was dysfunctional. Let me explore that a little bit. How can I integrate the two things? Well, Decker and Rina's foster son, Gabe Whitman, it's his biological parent. So, okay, we have an in there. How do I, and then the hunt is obviously the title. It's the hunt for Terry's kidnapped son, as well as the hunt for this body that Decker and McAdams found in the woods. Who is this person, and how did he get there, or she get there? How did this body get there? And you take it from there. Okay, so you start with your theme. You have kind of the idea of who the characters are, and then you start kind of the chapter by chapter plot. What's going to happen here, what's going to happen there, or kind of a scene by scene thing. Sometimes it's in my head. I don't even have to write it down. I have the first 15 scenes in my head. Sometimes the plot is so complicated, I have to write a chapter by chapter outline. That being said, your outline always changes. It never matches how the actual book is. And there's a lot of reconciliation that's done in the way by the middle of the book. And you start with a thread of an idea, and it doesn't go anywhere, so you have to excise that idea. It's a lot of surgery work. It's a lot of cutting and pasting and doing that kind of stuff. But eventually you get a smooth transition from chapter 1 to chapter 40.
I'm glad you brought up the idea that you were beginning with of relationships, and you've got Rina and Peter, their relationship contrasted with the other couples on top of this really gripping crime story. And thinking back, a lot of your books are exercises in contrast or that comparing contrast a lot. Is that something that just really gets your creative juices flowing?
I think so. I think characters get my creative juices flowing. Who are these characters who are involved, and why are they involved? And let's dig a little deeper and see who they are. What makes them tick? That's what I'm saying. So my plots tend to be on a very, very individual, person by person level. So if there is I won't say a bad guy, because nobody's ever 100% bad and 100% good. There's always contrasts in there. If there is a person who is a criminal and is doing something criminal, what is making he or she do that? Why are they doing that? What in their background brought them to this state where they have to feel the only way out is something criminal? So that's really what I like to do. But I do start with a theme, basic themes too: jealousy, greed, love, the basic human emotions. That way I feel even if the character is bad or good, my readers can relate to whatever character I have.
Yeah. Faye, I heard someone say one time that no matter how successful you've been as an author, the great equalizer is that blank page at the beginning of a book. No matter what you've achieved in the past, it all comes down to staring at a blank page and then creating a story to go on that blank page. You mentioned a little bit ago that book writing is a lot like surgery in one phase of it, where you're copying and pasting and finding the way that the narrative flows and how it pieces together. Over the course of 27 odd books, how has your process changed, and does it get easier, or like that saying, is the blank page the great equalizer?
Very good question. Again, it does not get easier because you've written a certain amount of ideas and a certain amount of characters and a certain amount of plots, and you don't want to repeat yourself. So every time you come up with it's time to write a book, you must try to find something novel. That's what I said. You can't change your characters, but you have to throw them into a novel situation, or you're going to write the same book over and over and over. And all of us tend to write the same book, but we try to make it interesting. I usually don't get writer's block because I think about it for a long time before I even attempt to write, and that's where an outline comes in handy if you need it. Because it's something to refer back to. As I said in the very, very beginning, writing begets writing. So I don't care. You stare at that blank page, and I don't care what you write. Just write something. Write something dreadful. It was a dark and stormy night. It doesn't matter what you write. The loop of writing something and reading it on page stimulates the brain to write more. So as a result, I usually don't get writer's block. I don't think I've ever had it. I've had times where writing is much easier than other times. Sometimes it's a struggle. Sometimes if you can crank out a page, you felt like you did a great job. Sometimes you write 15 pages. I'm not saying that every time you write, it's the same process over and over, but you need to put something down on paper. Unless you put something down on paper, you're not going to get that feedback loop, and it's not going to propel you forward. So that's what works for me. I start with a paragraph, and it's not probably well written, and it's not very good, but it propels me to the next one. And then, of course, you go back and rewrite what you wrote the next day, the day before, and you fix it up.
You said that in the big.
Which is very helpful too, because when you're writing what you wrote, it gives you continuity throughout the book. Right.
You said that in the beginning that you generally spend a lot of time thinking through the story. A lot of writers will tell you that you need to write every day and to build those habits, and I think that's a phenomenal habit to get into, to sit down and do the work every day. But what I think a lot of people overlook is the fact that sometimes thinking about the story and thinking through how the characters are going to react and what this plot would mean for these characters. And I think in a lot of ways that part is just as much writing as the sitting down at the keyboard.
Absolutely. Stephen King talks about in his book on writing, if I remember correctly, the need to get an idea versus having an idea and developing an idea. And for that, you take a lot of long walks. It's the only thing that works. You just sit there and you're walking and you're thinking. You have to be aware of traffic, of course, but taking walks I find are very helpful in developing plots and to getting ideas. Your mind is blank, Right. You need a blank canvas. If it's too cluttered with things you have to do, you're never going to get that step. So that's why sitting down and developing good habits is very important, because you need that blank canvas. You need that blank page. That you can stare at the blank page for a while and start thinking, and then you type your sentences, and then you get the feedback, and then you go on from there.
The Hunt, which is Decker and Lazarus book 27, is out everywhere August 23rd. We're going to have links to it in the show notes where you can grab it from Amazon and have the hardcover in your hand like I have right now, or the Kindle edition or the audiobook, or go visit your local bookstore and let's support local books through this tough time that bookstores have had to endure. Faye, are you working on the next Decker and Lazarus novel yet? I'm
always thinking, put it that way. I am always thinking. I might take a hiatus for a while, but I'm always thinking. You can't shut the brain off, even if you decide, well, I'm going to take a break for a little bit. The brain keeps going. That's just the way it is.
I love it. The Hunt, available everywhere on the 23rd. Go grab it. Faye, this has been so much fun chatting. Thank you for coming back on the show.
It's a pleasure, Hank. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.